everyone. I'm so glad that so many of you were able to join us this morning. We've got some people here in real life and some people joining us online for an experiment in hybrid technology. So we hope that you're here for some great hybrid experiences today. Most of you, I know from looking at the list, know who I am, but if you don't, my name is Alice Brown. I'm the Chief of Policy and Planning at Boston Harbor now. And like I said, this is our first fully hybrid. So we're going to be doing a real tour at Langone Pueblo Park, and we're going to be you'll be watching live on the screen. So thank you for tuning in and participating. Also here today, in addition to Rachel, thanks Rachel for leading us off and introducing us. We have, and I will show you in a moment, actually I can turn it around now. We have Erin Toffler and Kathy Abbott, also from Boston Harbor now, and leading the tour today are Kathy Baker Eclipse from the Parks Department and Brandon Kunkel from Weston and Sampson. I'm going to go back to them in just a second. Whew. All right. As most of you know, Boston Harbor now convenes monthly harbor use forums. Each forum is designed to help you learn more about the harbor, whether that's a project that's being done by a private developer or by the city, or it's a book that's been written about the harbor. We try to present lots of different professional viewpoints on what's happening. They're every month, and we expect to have one probably back online in September to learn more about a project out at the end of the seaport. For those of you who don't know, Langone and Pueblo Park is up in the far north corner of the north end, and it has been transformed over the last 2 years with a design process that began in 2017. I will talk to you more at the end about upcoming forums, other stuff about Boston Harbor now, but for now I'm going to turn it over and get this tour started.
So like Paul said, we started this design process in 2017, and we intend it to be a pretty straightforward park renovation. The facility that was here before was a rectangular athletic field with baseball and softball and a little league field. There were 3 bocce courts. There was a playground, and it hadn't been renovated. The playground at least 20 years. And the other facilities were a little bit older than that. So the lights especially were of major concern. They were quite antiquated, so we knew we were going to spend a lot of time looking at the lighting systems. So we started the design process in late 2017, and then while we were in our 3-meeting sequence, the storms in early 2018 in January, right after the first of the year, and then around mid-March, really showed us that the climate, the sea level rise issue was one that we couldn't ignore. The condition pre-construction was that the street was, existing level. It's about. Sorry.
If you just hold the mic part.
Okay.
We'll see if this improves this. Anywhere in there.
Okay. So the existing street was a high point generally of the park, and then it sloped down to the harbor front, to the harbor walk, and the field stepped down a little bit as well along that path. In 2018, there's a couple of images I think in the packets, and we can show them here. There's also an exhibit out on the waterfront on the harbor walk, showing what the field looked like. So there was quite a bit of flooding in the field itself, in the Little League field, and completely covering the harbor walk. So we knew that the projections that this was a 1% storm, had a 1%, it was a 100-year storm, had a 1% chance of happening every year, and that was going to be increasing in frequency. So this was going to be a reality that if we didn't address and protect the assets in the park, we were going to quickly lose this facility for functional use. So our design team helped us do some studies, and design team of Weston and Sampson helped us do some studies, really understand what was going on, what was projected, where we were, and where we thought we needed to be. And fortunately, we were able to make some pretty major design changes to the facility. So the program didn't change too much. We kept a rectangular field. We converted it to artificial turf to increase the use of the field throughout the year, and being able to program full-size soccer on it. The Little League field stayed pretty much
exactly where it was. We just changed the grade. We doubled the size of the bocce court facility. So there were 3 courts here. They were sunken. We brought them up to grade, made them accessible, and there's now 6. Moved the children's play area, but that program remained. We also added the fitness equipment. Yeah, that was the probably the biggest program change, and then just created a lot of other really inviting places to be along the harbor. So, Brandon, you want to get more into the?
Thanks, Kathy. I'm gonna also take my mask off, and if people can not hear me or have trouble hearing me, just raise a hand and I'll try and speak louder. So as Kathy mentioned, we started the design process with Boston Parks back in 2017. And it really was intended to just be a full-blown but typical sort of park improvement program. And what's great about this park, just right off the bat, has a tremendous history to it. It's actually one of the oldest parks in the Boston Park system. I believe it was officially adopted as a park in 1893. It used to be the North End Beach, actually, which was really where the rectangular athletic fields are now. And it sloped pretty much from the street level down at a beach, down to the water, until about the 1930s or 40s, I believe. And then they started to fill it in. The beach went away. It became parkland. Up until even the 70s, this half of the park was a fire station and police station. And then even before that, and what's really one of the key historical moments of Boston and what this park is really known for historically, it's the home of the Great Molasses Flood. It's funny. So there is a plaque that memorializes it, as well as part of the upgrades to the park, we did a whole informational signage program to talk about the history of the park, what you're looking at across the water. And we worked with folks to develop those images and graphics.
That was Friends of Harbor Walk.
The Friends of the Harbor Walk. Yes.
It's part of their overall Harbor Walk interpretation.
Correct. So the actual molasses tank itself, as Kathy mentioned, was literally right on the Little League field, pretty much within the confines of the infield itself. And, it broke, it burst. And another interesting fact, that was really the moment in the city of Boston and really nationally where they're like, we need to have some sort of checks and balances when it comes to engineering. And that's what started the whole engineering certification and registration process. Some other interesting facts, while it's not quite an Olmsted park, Olmsted did have some oversight and some input on the park across the street, and that those same retaining walls are actually serve as one of the border edges of Langone and Pueblo along the athletic fields. So fast forward 125 years, and through a series of improvements, and now we're up for another round. As Kathy mentioned, we were in the midst of design, and a nor'easter came in March 2nd, 2018, flooded entire downtown of Boston. I'm sure you folks are aware, probably saw the images or experienced yourself. So that's really when the city pivoted, and Boston Park specifically, and said, yes, we have to admit that this is part of life and reality now, and let's address it. And they were really proactive. So as a design team, we all pivoted, particularly on the climate resilience program, and started our studies. And ultimately, what we've determined is we were going to raise the park anywhere from 3 to 6 feet across the water's edge, and then transition back to the street level. So just because we were really tied in at our existing edges at the property boundaries, and also maintaining accessibility, we did the best we could on raising the elevation. And even then, 6 feet is still pretty substantial. with that came a very intensive investigation program. As I mentioned, there were it used to be a former rail yard, a former police station, former fire department. So you can imagine what lies in the soils beneath. It used to also be part of the harbor. So we knew right off the bat the soils were going to be troublesome. And we'll talk a little bit more as we move through. We did quite an extensive ground improvements program. And really what that means is the first 15 feet on the back side of the seawall essentially is independent and does not impact the existing seawall or the soils below it. In the essence, it's sort of floating on a bunch of piles or ground improvements. There's over 1,000 ground improvements, which are basically rigid stone columns that go down about 60 to 70 feet. They're grouted in place, and they're basically a stone toothpick, and they're holding up the soils and the materials on top of it. And then on top of that, the actual boardwalk itself stands on your standard steel driven piles, and those go about another 60 to 70 feet deep as well into the Boston Harbor base. We went through all the blue clay, went through all the muck, and then till we hit the bedrock below. So there's lightweight fill, which is a very specific engineered aggregate type soil. It's about half the weight of typical soil backfill. The reason for that was because the soils were so compromised below, any weight we added would just push it down and then therefore push it out, or would ultimately compromise the seawall. So we would be dealing with settlement, and we'd be dealing with bigger impacts to the seawall. Because we didn't have much information on the actual seawall, we were very nervous to touch it for many reasons. Seawalls are very expensive, and the permitting time with Army Corps is also very extensive. So we made the decision really to build around the seawall and up and over the seawall by using the cantilevered boardwalk. In regards to stormwater management, there is a very robust stormwater collection system, particularly underneath the synthetic turf fields, the natural grass fields, and the playground area. A lot of lateral drains, a lot of collector pipes. As part of this project, as we were going through the permitting process, Boston Water and Sewer saw an opportunity to team up with Boston Parks. They know that they have flooding issues currently within Commercial Street during certain storm events. The system isn't large enough to handle certain storm events. They have it on their radar to upgrade Commercial Street in the next few years. However, what they were really looking for was access to the water because there's no outfalls. And elevationally, it's very challenging for them to get water out of this part of the north end. So we ended up putting a major outfall for them through the park, and it heads out to the ocean. It'll eventually it's not connected right now. It's just waiting for them to connect. And then ultimately they'll be doing all their stormwater improvements. There's also another outfall that is on that side of the park, not quite as large. It's only a 12-inch outfall, but that handles stormwater from that side of the park. So we are collecting through the 100-year storm events within the park, and then treating it. And then it ultimately, once it's treated and cleaned, it goes out to the harbor. The good thing about this is that when it comes to cleaning stormwater, because it's a park and the way Boston Park operates, we're really not having to deal with typical dirty stormwater. It's really just superficial runoff. We're not dealing with oils. We're not dealing with any other solids that would normally have to be treated. We do have some collection systems and cleanouts throughout the park, but overall, it's just as though it was stormwater running into the harbor, clean and treated, and then put back into nature. If we could, we'll just sort of meander this way. So part of the program, as Kathy mentioned, just within the north end and really the downtown district, there really aren't a lot of athletic fields. So when it comes to recreation and active use, this is really a key park for those groups, particularly the north end and the downtown area. So really getting athletic fields was critical. Part of the previous park and one of the issues that they were constantly running up against was overuse of fields. And therefore, we made the decision to go with synthetic turf. It allows for basically 3 times the amount of programming and permitting that is put on it versus natural grass. So we did keep a natural grass Little League field at the request of the neighborhood. But from an overall park and permitting perspective, just getting people the access to have good, safe recreation facilities, the decision was made to go to synthetic turf. So not only does the neighborhood use it, or the recreation leagues use it, but also the Elliott School right here in the north end. This is their schoolyard. They bring the kids over here every day for gym and for just their recess. So this park gets used a tremendous amount. As you can see over the top of the wall, bocce is also a very big sport here in the north end. They have big tournaments during certain parts of the year. As Kathy mentioned earlier, they were sunken previously. They were constantly wet and flooded after rain events. We've raised them up, one, for the resiliency of the overall park, but just to get them out of being below the edges of the park from a drainage perspective. So we've doubled the amount of bocce courts. They're actually larger than the original bocce courts, and then provided cafe seating, completely ADA accessible. You're able to take out portions of the perimeter ring, be able to have accessible into areas into the bocce court.
The other, we also heard from the community that there was a strong desire to have additional adult recreation activities. So by doubling the amount of bocce, we could, a league could have half the area, and then other people could just pop up and play there. So it did provide additional recreational activities for adults. That was one of the things that we heard in the meetings.
All right. So I figure we'll start to make our way down to the actual harbor walk and enjoy some water views while we're at it. So I'm going to sort of walk and talk, if that's okay. So this main access is really, this is the main entrance to the park. It's always historically been the main entrance to the park. It connects well with the neighborhood, with the stairs and Cops Hill right behind us. And it just really frames up a great view over towards Charlestown. It really sets the stage for really what is a key connection on the harbor walk within the neighborhood and just the overall harbor walk system. This is really the connection over to Charlestown and beyond, coming from downtown Boston when it comes to the harbor walk. Ultimately, the trees will grow in. This is intended to be a very shady walk down to the water's edge. The trees are about 6 months old, so install wise. So in a few years, we anticipate that we'll have a much greater shade canopy. All the stone walls that you see here along the various park edges and defining the spaces, those are all salvaged from the original park. We salvaged over, I believe it was 320 blocks in total, and we just repurposed them, reset them up in different configurations, but these are all original to the park. A lot of it was as part of the seawall repairs that we did do in some of the interior granite block walls that were here previously.
I'm going to read you a question, and you're going to repeat it and then answer it.
You bet. We're going to try to answer it. Yes.
What is the flood elevation of the harbor walk along?
So we are designed for, yes. What is the elevation of the harbor walk? So there's really 2 elevations, and really anything that is behind the harbor walk edge, and we'll explain it in just a minute what that really means, is elevation 19.5. And then anything in front is really intended to, as climate resiliency pushes forward or storm events push forward, that these are intended to be inundated during storm events and then recede once the storm event has subsided. But really the protection is, if you look along the harbor walk, is this seat wall here. That entire edge is elevation 19.5 or greater. And as part of building a seawall, really what we didn't want was to separate the park as best we could from the water's edge. It was really critical that we maintain the view and access to the park accessibility wise. And so we built the seawall on the backside of the harbor walk. One, as I mentioned, the seawall is really old. Not that it's failing, but we just didn't want to compromise it anymore. And we just didn't have a lot of information about it. So we made the decision to build on the backside. And instead of just creating a standard wall, we really took the opportunity to build places for people to sit and gather and look out over the water. And it doesn't feel like a wall. It's more of a design element that embraces climate resilience. It doesn't have to be a in-your-face design that says I'm a wall. It can be concealed behind a seat wall or other design elements. As the park progresses in age and climate resilience, data continues to evolve. This is really intended to be a design that is able to be built upon in the future. So structurally below grade, we're intending that they're able to add to walls or adjust elevations in the future. So as I mentioned, this harbor walk is completely independent of anything that is below it or in front of it or in back of it, really. The seawall that is on the backside is floating. It's actually not connected to the harbor walk at all. So if you had to, you could raise the harbor walk without impacting the seawall or vice versa. But it really allows Boston Park in the future to make decisions about how they want to address climate change as the age of the park continues. On average, for a full renovation, it ranges based on use, but on average, parks last about 25 to 30 years before they come back and do a major renovation. So we expect that, in the next 25, 30 years, as more climate resilient data becomes available or as storm events increase ahead of schedule, that really puts Boston Parks in the position to adjust accordingly in that aspect.
We've got a question from Wes here, but I want to also someone typed in about the harbor walk elevation. There's a concern about the ability to have harbor walk use during nuisance flooding, like associated with sea level rise, not storm surge. But it seems like you've addressed that the idea is that this is actually high enough that it's going to be out of nuisance flooding for quite some time, and it can be elevated when it's fixed.
Correct. So currently when we took over in 2017 and started the design process, we are 4 feet higher already than what it was previously. So from a storm perspective, we are at least 30 years from the data that we were using, which is all City of Boston climate standards. So.
Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah. What type of closure do you have for this area here?
So the question is, what type of closure do they have for the accessible routes? And the answer is, at this moment in time, nothing. Kathy can speak to it. They know or anticipate that over time, they will have to do deployables or adjust the elevation. The issue we ran into was accessibility and creating barriers and walls. And as I mentioned, we really didn't want to cut off access to the harbor walk. And we were limited for many factors on really overall budget and design. But we weren't able to raise the entire park as much as we would like to because of budget. But we knew, like, if we're going to allow flooding, let's make sure we're allowing water to get out. This is actually intended to be a flood pathway from Commercial Street, because in reality, Commercial Street is lower at that side, and Commercial Street will actually flood before the park does. So this is intended to serve as a flood pathway out from Commercial Street for the time being.
The 19.5 elevation is also wraps.
Correct.
The 19.5 flood design flood elevation is somewhere in this wall, and then it crosses the walkway. So for the next 30 years, we think we're above that 1% storm. So that should buy us enough time to figure out what the next strategies are, what the next level of strategies are. We don't currently have a good system of using deployables, but I think that's something that's going to be coming in the next, we'll be developing in the near future. So as that comes in, identifying where those key locations for deployables may be is something that we're going to have to be looking at citywide.
So how much higher would you have wanted to go if you could have afforded it?
Sure. So the question was, if we could afford it, how much higher would we have gone? And the answer is elevation 19.5 is the 2070 flood elevation. So if we, yes, correct. So if we could have, we would have liked to have gone all the way up. But because a lot of other factors that were taken into, so Boston Parks doesn't actually own the pool. They own the land, but it's operated by a different department, and they have plans to develop that project site as well. And it actually includes potentially some renovations to the park itself. So we didn't want to have to adjust design or have them adjust their design, because they're also doing resilient and adapting, and we didn't want to. So we were tied into that grade. That was the decision that was made, and then therefore the basketball courts, and then also on the other side, DCR as well. So just maintaining accessibility and along the Harbor Walk as best we could, and then designing it to be inundated during certain events in the future, and then really getting the water out as quickly as possible.
Any sense of the magnitude of the cost of that?
So I can say overall, so the park construction cost is approximately, I think 14.5 million. And if I had to venture, at the time of bidding, I would have probably said another 2 or 3 million. Mm-hmm. But what I like about the Harbor Walk in this new design, it's actually much wider than the previous one, and it feels a lot more open. We were very conscious of that. We tried to minimize the handrail appearance as much as possible, so it sort of fades into the background and isn't so heavy, but it is safe. And then it really does open up the basketball court. The basketball court actually used to sit 4 to 5 feet above the Harbor Walk. So just from accessibility and having a much larger open space for events is what we thought it was a great benefit. And the grade did not change on the basketball court, mostly because of the playground and cost.
Can you look back at go out on the pier a little and look back at the Harbor Walk and really see what's.
So this is a great perspective of how much we raised it. If you look, you'll see the original steel pile wall, which was repaired as part of this project. It was actually failing, and they had actually shut down part of the Harbor Walk for quite a bit of time while they were fixing the repairs or designing the repairs of this sheet pile wall. There's actually three separate walls types along this boardwalk here. There's a granite granite stone C block seawall. There's cast in place concrete, and there's steel sheet piles, and they're all from different vintages and eras when they were actually installed. As the city filled it in and took more land, they used different methods of holding the ocean back. As you can see, there's 2 layers of granite blocks. Those were also either previously there or stacked up, salvaged, and put on top of the sheet pile wall. And then behind it is where the piles and the steel structure of the boardwalk sit. But as I mentioned previously, they are completely independent. They are not tied to any of the walls. It's as though we're standing on a floating platform. But that shows approximately the elevation that was raised from the top of the steel up to the bottom of the bottom of deck.
And the elevation.
Yep.
The elevation of the harbor walk was actually at the lower block, top of the lower block. So, so the top of the seawall that you're seeing, the top of that granite is actually about 18 inches, 12 to 18 inches below the original harbor walk elevation. So you can see just how much we raised the harbor walk, and then another couple of feet to the protected program area.
Thanks.
How far back does the engineering sort of platform that we're on go into the park? Is it the entirety up to the street, or?
No, so the question is, how far back does the steel structure of the boardwalk go into the park? And it really goes no further than the gray seat wall that you see there. But behind the gray wood slats is a cast in place concrete wall. And that is our new seawall behind it. So.
Yeah, there's an interface sign.
Yeah. But really great views. As I mentioned, there's a lot of informational signage. This one here talks about the North End Beach, which is we're sort of standing out on a pier in a bathhouse that was part of the North End Beach currently. And it went out over the water. You get to look towards Charlestown, and it's pretty magnificent views, particularly at sunrise and sunset.
Great job. Glad they got in.
I thought maybe we could continue on more towards the hockey rink side, the DCR property. Another interesting piece of this property, so it is city-owned property, City of Boston, but we're flanked by the state with Department of Conservation and Recreation and the hockey rink on one side, and then we're flanked by the federal government with the U.S. Coast Guard on the other. So just corresponding and communicating with multi-level layers of government was pretty interesting throughout the project. I will say the U.S. Coast Guard was probably one of the easiest abutters that we've ever had to deal with. Are we doing anything that will compromise security? No, then we're all set. So. As Kathy mentioned, one of the major upgrades is the lighting within the sports fields. Because it is a urban site and we're surrounded by residences immediately across on Commercial Street, light cutoff was critical. These lights here are designed in a way that really the cutoff happens within 15 feet of the edge of the play surface. So they are pretty dramatic when it comes to light levels and dark skies. They are actually dark skies compliant when it comes to athletic field lighting. So where we could, and you'll notice it here, where we could and sort of preparing for the future, we did start to raise the elevation of the boardwalk. And so you'll see that from an accessibility standpoint, it does ramp up, completely code compliant. but we are beginning to make those adjustments for the city so that in the future, they're not having to completely raise up all elevations, just certain portions. So we picked really the most salt tolerant and wind heavy plants we could. And I must say, I'm sorry? And native, yes. So these are newly planted, but they are doing well. And Boston Parks does have a pretty good maintenance program, but just, you know, it is a public park, and Boston Parks does not have sort of the maintenance and manpower. So we do have to be very cautious about sort of heavy maintenance type plants. These are really intended to be native, low maintenance, robust, tolerant plants. So. Any questions? Any questions on the phone?
One was a question about light rain. Are there light rains appropriately spaced among the
So currently this park does not have life rings. I guess I would defer to Kathy on that.
It doesn't, and I think it might be because we don't have an official access point. There's no official water access point along this stretch of the harbor walk. I don't know what would be the trigger for having to provide life rings.
There's no.
Yeah, and that might be the difference, that we have a barrier, so there's no the guardrail is intended to keep you on the harbor, keep you on the land side.
Another question was about Commercial Street and whether or not there was supposed to be like a wider crosswalk or a raised crosswalk connecting Uphill.
It is a public works thing, yeah. Yeah, so one of the, in digging through our archives in this project, I did find an unbuilt plan from the Olmsted firm that showed a bridge from Cops Hill over to the North End Beach, which was quite fascinating. That was never realized. And there was in the early 20th century, there was a rail line down the middle of Commercial Street. But yeah, so we do work closely with the Public Works Department on creating crosswalks. It's really, they're governed by public transportation standards about distances from crosswalks and distances between crosswalks. So something that we might look to in the future, but the main crosswalk across Commercial Street is at the Charter Street entrance, which we're coming up to. So there's a very major light and signalized crossing at that point.
So we're headed down towards the playground in the Department of Conservation property now. And we'll talk about a few of the features that are on that side of the park. So this is coming up here on the left-hand side. It's another part of the seawall. We actually, just to provide a little bit of variety, we made it into grandstand style seating. And it also serves as a barrier edge for the playground on the backside. So in lieu of a metal picket fence, we raised the wall up, serves as a backrest when you're sitting on the wall, and then multiple terraces. That's actually the cover photo on the paper, the handout that was given earlier, is people sitting on here looking towards the sunset. So it is quite remarkable when there is a nice sunset out here. And it's great to see people enjoying it and embracing it and taking in the views of the water. Yeah, so if you look down at the bottom here where the boardwalk ties into the concrete wall and then the gray wall. So the gray wall is the new seawall. And then you can see how the harbor walk interacts with it. It looks like it's touching it and it's built on it. Yes, it's superficially touching it, but it's not actually connected to it at all. And then there's a steel structure that actually cantilevers off of the seat wall to support the decking, the bleacher seating. So that is actually floating above the wood deck itself as well. So coming up on the playground on the left, and we'll circle back just a minute to the harbor walk, but as we were raising the park elevation, we wanted to use that to our advantage. And so like we used it within the playground to provide some interest in topography change. So there's actually 2 different levels of the playground. Underneath the safety surfacing is a very robust drainage system. The rubber itself is very porous. It collects all the water and then stores it in collector pipes. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's an outfall that runs underneath the boardwalk that we're standing on right now. And then we once again use salvage granite blocks within the playground, both as safety barriers as well as just interest and climbing elements for the kids. So the question was asked earlier, what is the design elevation 19.5? And Kathy had mentioned that it does recede back into some of the flood pathways a bit. This is a great graphic. It's actually in the handout as well. But really, so from a design elevation standpoint, what you see at the edge of the park and along the backside of the harbor walk here, the red line, that is the critical elevation 19.5 throughout the park. That is protecting the flood elevation, or protecting the park from flooding. In the actual handout and not on the sign, there is a graphic that shows the previous 19.5 elevation, which is much further back. It's a white line. It's on the second page. That was the original elevation 19.5. So you can see close to 90% of the park would have flooded in the future had we not done anything. So we do tie into elevation 19.5 over at the pool side. Topographically, Commercial Street does rise up to about elevation 23 on the pool side, but elevation 19 is somewhere within the hockey rink itself. And so that is pretty much all I have. I'm happy to answer more questions if there are more, or hand it back to Kathy as well. Sorry. Did you have anything?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think I got all of the questions that were in the chat. Is there any other questions from people watching online?
Have you also, thank you. Have you also included resiliency plans for urban heat as well in terms of like shade or sprinklers or those kinds of like materials used?
So yes, and I'll let Kathy speak.
Well, yeah. So I think one of the things that we thought about was shade. There are some shaded dugout shelters for the dugouts for players, and also because the artificial turf does have, there's heat associated with the artificial turf and the infill. There's also an existing spray play on the far east side that we did not include as part of this project, and I think the The plans for the Mirabella pool will incorporate that in some fashion. That program will remain, but it wasn't part of this project. So we didn't want to add another spray play element because there is the pool and the spray pad for public use already adjacent. But we were also very cognizant of adding trees as well, trying to get some trees for shade as well. Did I miss
Yeah,
anything?
unfortunately, because we were raising the elevation of the park dramatically, while we always try and strive to save as many trees as possible, particularly mature, healthy trees, because we were raising the grade, we ultimately had to take a lot of trees out. We did save all the trees along Commercial Street as best we could. And so, but that's more because of, at that point, we're tying back into existing elevations. But we did end up adding, I believe is an additional 20 trees or so with net increase over the previous amount of trees. So hopefully within, 5-10 years, we'll have a much stronger canopy within the park.
All right. With that, if we don't have more questions, thank you to Tom for putting in the chat the link to the London best practice. We can share that out with folks who are here in person. I want to thank everyone who joined us online and everyone who joined us here in real life. Hi guys, thank you for tuning in to this tour. We'll have a link to the recording available in the future if you want to share it with other people. And as always, you can follow Boston Harbor Now on various social media, Instagram, Facebook, probably LinkedIn, Twitter. You can find out about upcoming events like this, as well as fun events like Spectacle Summer Nights happening this Saturday night. And then stay tuned for the September Harbor Use Forum. We hope to have hybrid versions in the future, but given the Delta variant, we're probably going to stick with Zoom for most of our meetings like this for now. So thank you again.